What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dare Route YouTube channel. We're back with another top 25 college football team. We were counting down the top 25 teams in college football. We are down to LSU. We're going to be talking about the Tigers down there in the Bayou, talking about Brian Kelly. Does he have them back? We haven't seen any dancing videos this offseason. So we'll talk about the recruiting class. We're going to be diving into all of that on this preview, going over offense, defense, transfers, impact players, their 2024 schedule, what their over-under is, and can LSU go to the playoffs? That's what we're looking at. But before we do that, we got to talk about last year a little bit. When you're looking at overall, they were 10-3 last year. And like we talked about it pre-show, one of the weirdest LSU teams that we've probably seen. Offensively, they had it. Jaden Daniels, obviously the Heisman winner, 3,800 yards, 40 touchdowns in the air, 1,100 yards rushing. He was fantastic last year, right? We're talking about when you think about wide receivers, we're talking about Brian Thomas Jr., we're talking about Malik Neighbors. That offense was absolutely cooking. But the defense was terrible. Like on the defensive side, had they had just the normal LSU defense, this team would have competed for a national title. That's how good they could have been, but they just didn't have that, right? And so moving forward, what does this look like? They're going through a transition. They did lose a lot of guys we'll talk about. But when you look at their offense from last year as well, they were number one in points per game last year, 43.3. Looking at yards per game, number one in points per play, number one in yards per play, number two in third down conversion. They were fantastic there. They averaged over 6 yards per rush last year, number one in the nation there. A lot of that had to do with Jaden Daniels, though. And in passing stats, when you're looking at that overall, number one in yards per pass. They were very vertical last year, number three in passing yards per game. It was fantastic from a passing standpoint and in a rushing standpoint, too. And they had a pretty good offensive line for the most part last year. They just defensively couldn't put it together there. And that's really what we're talking about with LSU. Now, new quarterback, it looks like, probably new weapons all over the place. So what are we looking at with the 2024 LSU offense, Christian?
We're looking at one of the best offensive lines in football, in college football at least. And so that is a good start, right? You lost Charles Turner from center, but you have probably the best tackle duo in college football. You've got two really, really good guards in Miles Frazier and Garrett Dellinger. So that's a good start, right? Especially when you don't have the Jaden Daniels running aspect in this offense anymore, because when we talk about Garrett Nussmeier, very much so a pocket quarterback. He's athletic enough, but he prefers to sit in the pocket and throw the ball. This offensive line is going to set him up to do that. Mm-hmm. The weapons are a bit more of a question mark. Caleb Jackson at running back. Josh Williams is still there. John Emery Jr. is somehow still there. But Caleb Jackson is the prize of that running back room. I think by the end of the year, he's getting the lion's share of carries there. Aaron Anderson is one of those guys where I think we haven't seen a lot from him, but he's got so much talent. As a recruit, he had a ton of talent. One of those underrated guys that I think people have slightly forgotten about. Probably LSU fans have not, but just the large scope, I think a lot of people have. Kyron Lacey had some really good film last year. The stats aren't going to suggest that he's a good player, but we like stats here, but not that much. And then CJ Daniels coming in, I think, is a really good get. So this Mason Taylor's a good tight end. Like they have weapons. It's not even close to what they had last year, but I think probably you're taking a step down in quarterback play. Either way, I think Jaden Daniels was absolutely phenomenal last year, but Nussmeier is a very good quarterback. I know Andy at our channel has him as his quarterback one in next year's class. I have him up at QB4, so this kid could be a first-round NFL draft pick. He's got the protection for it. We'll see if he has the weapons.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to Garrett, really. Like when you're looking at Nussmeier, what can he do in this offense? Like, and coaching staff talk about him. They talk about him being a better passer, actually. Like, and they said, hey, he's a kind of a more pocket passer, better passer at times that they like to see it. The big thing for them that they want to see from Nussmeier that they mentioned was his just, hey, don't take the risk that you don't need. The unnecessary risk, kind of like the YOLO ball stuff. That's part of that. That's going to be there. But they've waited for him. And I'm glad you brought up Mason Taylor. Mason Taylor could be one of the best tight ends in the country this year. I mean, Mason Taylor has that talent. He has that upside. And my boy, Aaron Anderson, come on, Aaron Anderson. We got to do something for me in there. He could be their big playmaker. Like Aaron Anderson can do that. I thought he was going to do that last year, but I think Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik kind of just took that over in that room, and you kind of saw that. But Aaron's getting slept on a little bit. I do think from that slot position, he can kind of take over there. Now, when we're talking about notable losses, I mean, the big one's Jaden Daniels. We know that. I mean, that's huge, losing the Heisman winner and everything there. Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., both first-round talents, right? And Brian Thomas Jr. was someone, when I did the LSU Reading the Room, wide receiver room last year, I did say, hey, this kid could definitely pop off. He's one of those players that you should watch in that room, and he did. He bounced back, and he had that. Zalance Hurd, Jalen Brown kind of left, but those aren't necessarily notable losses. It's really the big three and how they replace those guys. And it really comes down to like, Nussmeier stepping up, but also Kyron Lacey. He's got a lot of buzz out there. Older prospect there. I mean, he's really to make this offense go. I think that they're kind of relying on him to have a huge year this year. And I don't know if he's got that in his bag. I'm not sure. I don't know if I'm buying the Kyron Lacey like buzz where he can replace that, but I guess it's just gonna have to be a collective whole of all those guys in that room.
Yeah, we'll talk about the transfers here shortly, but CJ Daniels is a name that I just, when you watch the film, there's a reason he was one of the higher rated wide receiver transfers in the country. It's just a very good player. They also brought in Xavier Thomas. So if Lacey isn't it, maybe this committee can provide something similar, but it's really, really tough to replace what Neighbors and Thomas gave you. They're both their top 23 picks or whatever. I don't remember where Thomas was selected, but just an insanely talented wide receiver room last year. We'll see if people step up. I think Mason Taylor is going to have to be more involved, and I think they're going to have to rely on the running game just a little bit more this year.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that they are going to have to lean on that, which is something that the running back room, they've been searching for that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're thinking of like where they've been searching for that, they've been searching for that for a long time, trying to find that consistency in there. And then when you look at the recruiting class, they've done a really good job. 2024 recruits, when you look at that, number 9 overall, number 7 composite rank. And you have to like that there. Overall, they got some defensive guys, but Cone Eccles is there, interior offensive lineman, 6'2", 315, number 5 rated offensive lineman. Colin Hurley as well. Very not like top 10 guys, especially on the offensive side, but just kind of filler guys when you're looking at kind of how they brought in. They have a lot of early enrollees from like, that first group there, but their second guys, the guys that haven't been on campus yet. Trades Green, number 2 tight end out there, right? 6'6", 225. Keelan Billiot from Louisiana. I definitely just messed up that. I am sorry, Louisiana fans. 6'2", 188. Jelani Watkins. Those guys that aren't on there yet. Caden Durham is another one, number 6 rated running back. When they get on the campus and they're out there, and we're talking about them now in late July, August, they could really start making a name for themselves.
Yeah, tight end is a really tough position for freshmen to kind of give an impact as a freshman at least. But Trades Green looks every bit a player that can do that, especially when you're searching for someone to step up as a receiver. If the players that we mentioned in the wide receiver room and maybe Mason Taylor goes down, I wouldn't be shocked if Trades Green kind of takes the conference by storm a little bit, because he does have a receiving skill set that could lend itself to early production. The blocking isn't quite there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It normally isn't with high school kids, though. So, hopefully he's a quick learner on that front. Maybe they use him creatively, which they've been known to do with their tight ends at times. So this is a fantastic class. It's kind of a, I wouldn't say it's a top heavy class, because I think they lived in that, like you said, like that 10 to 25 to 30 range as far as like positional rankings go. But, Brian Kelly recruits, and it's his one main thing that he does really, really well. And LSU obviously does as well, but good class. I'm into it. I like it.
Yeah, and I mean, the interesting one, Michael Turner's down there, and I didn't really mention him too much, but when you're looking at him, 6'1", 150, so he's smaller on the side, but he's number 9 rated position player at the wide receiver position. Like, he got guys there. And Weston Davis, offensive tackle, 6'5", 275, big boy. Like, they've done a good job of that. Defensively, they really crushed that there. But I think a name is Caden Durham's a name. I think he's a name that you got to know from Texas out there. I think that they've just been looking for that running back, right? We hope it's Caleb Jackson, it's that, but like, that's really where they've struggled with. They've tried to address in transfer portal. They kind of missed there. They tried to kind of have that guy like Noah Kane, for example. John Emery Jr. just hasn't stepped up. So really, maybe Caden Durham's that guy too now. 5'9", 195, big kid there. From a transfer status, I'll let you talk about CJ Daniels. They didn't really do a ton in the transfer portal. They were ranked 41. They didn't address their needs there on offense or defense. There wasn't a lot of guys. Really, it's those guys. AJ Swan's coming over from Vanderbilt. Xavier Thomas is really kind of someone coming over there from Mississippi State. He came in as a 4-star to Mississippi State. Now he's a 3-star. But I know you like CJ Daniels coming over from Liberty.
Yeah, just really good film. I think he gives this offense, a little bit of the juice that they're losing, right? I think that could be one of their stop gaps as some of these younger wide receivers do take shape. Like I said, I hope it's Aaron Anderson, but if not, I think Daniels has the experience and the wherewithal to be a productive player out there. AJ Swan's an interesting one because he was highly coveted. I watched the film and it's like, fine, yeah, like good
Yeah.
backup. It was similar to like the Will Howard transfer, right? But like Swan had teams that wanted him. And a lot of it, like I'm pretty sure there was a time when Ohio State was in on AJ Swan. And so when you start to talk about that, maybe that succession plan is looking a little bit better. They know that they probably only have Nussmeier for a year. They got Swan to come in and probably play next year as some of their younger guys get ready. But it's an interesting one or transfer class because it's just really light
Yeah.
in a world where transfer classes are normally a lot bigger than this.
Yeah, and that's I think the thing that stood out to me. I was like, man, they didn't really go after some guys here. I mean, they got some pieces, but nothing like a big group of guys. Maybe that just tells you. I mean, one thing that I think it does tell you is that they really feel like their line could be a strength because they didn't really go after interior offensive lineman or linemen, and they kind of like, hey, yeah, we got the guys there, which they do. I think the biggest question mark is probably the redshirt freshman DJ Chester, probably right. Like that's probably the guy that's a bigger question mark, but I probably have enough faith in him there. And when you look at impact players. Garrett Nussmeier's the guy, right? I think really this team lives or dies by Garrett Nussmeier in the SEC. I mean, he could realistically be a top 3 quarterback in the class or in the SEC. Like he could be that guy that you're like, hey, yeah, he can go. Beck, Nico, those guys out there, like, hey, Garrett's the guy, Jalen Milroe, kind of be in the top 4, and really going there. But it's really going to come down to does he make the right decisions? Does he play within the offense? How does that look there? We know Brian Kelly's not the most lenient coach when it comes to mistakes. He can get a little fired up if you ever watched him coach there. So I think how short is that leash going to be? Will they let him open it up a little bit in that offense, or are they going to kind of make him hand it off to Caleb Jackson, kind of do those little things there? And I still think Mason Taylor to me can be an impact player for this team and give Nussmeier that outlet, that guy to kind of rely on third down, those type of things.
Yeah, like you said, everything starts and ends with Nussmeier. He loves to throw that deep ball, and he'll
He
throw it up
does.
and let his guys win. Unfortunately, I'm not certain that they have the guys that are going to consistently win. So I think if he reins it in, we've seen him have just really good quick game. One of the best parts about his game is mechanically he is very sound. I'd like to see him add a little bit more zip, a little more arm strength as far as that goes. But from a draft perspective, like he has as good a shot as any of these other guys to become a first round pick if this LSU offense can kind of look similar to what it did last year. And I think the scheme's certainly going to help that out. But yeah, everything starts and ends with him hoping that he takes that step. And I mean, I say step, but we really haven't seen a whole lot from him. So just getting to see him on the field a little bit more is going to be exciting for the LSU fans.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's jump over to the defense. And we're looking at the defense here. This is where they struggled. Opponents points per game last year from their opponents, they were 86. They were almost 30 points given up there. Opponent yards per game, they were 110th in the nation last year. They gave up 424 yards a game. And that's really, rushing defense, they were okay, but they weren't great. I mean, they were, 51 for opponent rushing play percentage, opponent yards per rush. They're 84th, so they didn't really do there. But really, that pass defense, man. Opponent completion percentage, 117th in the nation. 83rd in opponent pass play percentage. 87th in opponent passes per game because opponents just threw it all over them. Looking at opponent interceptions thrown, only 89th, right? So they did not get takeaways. They did not do well there. Even for an LSU team that usually comes after the quarterback, sack percentage was at 45 in the country last year, 45th in the country, 7%. So this defense struggled. I mean, that is really that pass defense definitely struggled there. And they were a break, not just a bend defense. They were a break defense. And that's really why you saw them lose those games that they lost.
Yeah, it was not good last year, and the interesting part about that is they actually lost a ton of dudes that played a lot of snaps
Yeah.
to the NFL. The NFL was still like, yeah, these guys are talented. It just, it never came to fruition. I think their whole, Jacoby and Guillory, I think he's gonna be one of those guys that he played quite a few snaps last year. He played in 13 games, but he was certainly not one of their top 3 interior defensive linemen. And so I'm curious to see how he takes a step forward as he gets more of a prominent role. Harold Perkins Jr. is the cog that makes this go. And he was pretty rough last year. They played him out of position. I think that was intentional, but now he's moving back to a more natural position where he can play linebacker pretty consistently. He's not just, playing that edge rusher role. he was okay in it. There were times where he was good in it, but you kind of took your best defensive piece and just put him in a spot where he can't be as impactful. I think now they're correcting that. That's going to be a little bit better. Major Burns is a piece I'm intrigued by. There was he played a ton of snaps last year. He actually led the team in snaps. Really good tackler. Had a ton of tackles last year. I think that between Perkins and Burns taking steps forward, I think this defense can be a little bit better than last year. But it's really tough. It's really tough to project because they lost so much from that defensive front seven that I'm not certain about that call right there.
Yeah, I mean, look at what they lost. I mean, we're talking about Mason Smith, and while Mason kind of had a down year last year when you're looking at him, like, 28 tackles, 2.5 sacks. He still was very good. Wingo, though, Wingo was one of those guys that was supposed to be better, 4.5 sacks. But again, kind of, I don't know, it's just weird. I know he only played 8 games last year, but just didn't really step up, right? Jordan Jefferson, same thing. He had 2.5 sacks to 36 tackles. Denver Harris as well is another guy that left. And then you're looking at Quincy Wiggins, Jackson Howard, and some of those guys. Interesting, right? Like Denver Harris, he was okay. He had 2 pass deflections there. So, like you said, they did lose guys. This defense just wasn't clicking. For whatever reason, though, why it wasn't clicking, it was just not clicking for these guys inside. But they did lose a lot of their front seven.
Yeah. So, and then that's, I mean, the bottom line is they're going to need to find that type of production because while those guys had disappointing years, I think from LSU fans' perspective, from national perspective as well, they were still some of the best defensive linemen in the country.
Yeah.
When you look at it, did they get drafted? If we check that box, yes, then LSU probably has a problem. I do think that maybe there's some gelling issues, and hopefully that like all of these departures can remedy that a little bit, but I'm interested. I said before we started recording, I've never seen an LSU team like that where the offense was blowing people out of the waters and the defense couldn't keep up. That's not the LSU brand of football and not the Brian Kelly brand of football either.
No.
So I think we're gonna come back to the middle a little bit. I think this defense is gonna be a little bit more bend, a little less break, and hopefully that'll allow the discrepancy in the offense coming down just a little bit from a Heisman winning quarterback. Maybe they bridge that gap and maybe they're a better team for it.
Yeah, and Kelly, this isn't on so much on Kelly. His teams usually are solid that defensive side. Like that's the teams that got to the national title at Notre Dame. Like those guys are able to get in the playoff, those type of things. That was the defensive side there. Now they still cleaned up in recruiting, boys, on the defensive side. And as you can see here, really did a great job. Deshaun McBride, when you're looking at him, the safety, 6'2", 315. Dominic McKinley, number 5 rated defensive lineman, 6'5", 280. Those 2 guys could get some playing time. Like those guys could be out there very quickly. Tylen Singleton as well. Just going through the list, you can see kind of what they did. Very top heavy there. Gabriel Relaford as well. When you're looking at what he can do on the field, you really like what he can do as an edge. But those 2 top guys, even Tylen Singleton as well. McBride and Singleton are there already, so they're already there early enrollees. That's something that you like to see there. But Singleton's probably got to put some weight on. Some of these guys do need to put some weight on. Devon Keys is another one. He's already got 222, 5'11", so he's more or less ready to go. But solid recruiting on the defensive side here.
Yeah, CJ Jackson, that 3-star kid at the very bottom down there, like 6'5", 225, probably needs to put a little bit of weight on, but I think that's a player that could be a little more ready to go than even some of the other, higher recruited guys. 16 players on this list. I think that's the main takeaway is they saw the problem and they went out and got high school players to hopefully fix the problem. And I do think you're right. I think McKinley, McBride, I think one of the linebackers could get some playing time, especially like we said, with what we had last year. It's really tough to envision all of these returners and some of these transfers keeping these guys off the field. So this could be an impactful class. I think 2 years from now, we're going to look back and say that was when they righted the ship a little bit. But yeah, top heavy class, but depth is good too. They need depth. We saw that last year. So.
Yeah, Juwan Johnson down there at the bottom, cornerback, 5'11", 188, 19 rated prospect. Like he comes in, he's a fun one out of there, Lafayette, Louisiana. He's a guy also to kind of keep your eye on there. From the transfers, again, like we talked about, they didn't really address it too much. A little bit on the defense side. Gio Paz, when you're looking at him from Wisconsin, he was a big kid. They're expecting a little bit at the defensive line. He's actually a higher rated transfer than he was as a recruit, so he got a little bit better there. Austin Osbury coming over from Auburn, safety position. Jordan Gilbert, coming from A&M, he was a big get for A&M. Now he's coming over as a 4-star. You know, when you're looking at him kind of playing both roles, safety-ish, corner. Jair Brown as well, when you talk about him from Ohio State, he was a little bit higher recruit, but coming over from Ohio State, that's one thing they kind of note there. And then Suggs too. I mean, they did a good job of getting him coming over here, 3-star kid, 6'3", 282. So they did get some pieces on the defensive side, and they filled needs.
Yeah, Gilbert and Brown are the prizes here, in my opinion. I think Brown is way more talented than what we saw at Ohio State. Gilbert coming in as a highly touted recruit, but an even higher touted transfer is significant to me. I think that he can come in and kind of be a little bit of a leveler on the back end of that secondary. But overall, this is a pretty good class. You supplemented the really great recruiting class well, but when you start to talk about that, that's 21 new players on this defense, and so that's huge, especially with the state of that defense last year.
Yeah, and when you talk about impact players, I think the one thing we mentioned, we should have mentioned at the beginning anyway, he fired Matt House, their defensive coordinator, and all the assistants. He cleaned the house, and he looked at it, and now it's Blake Baker, right? Formerly at Missouri. He's got something to go there. So now you're talking about growing pains maybe a little bit early, like when you're looking at like how they're going to go, but they got a whole new system in there because they realized they needed that. The guys on here, I mean, Harold Perkins Jr. to me is like, hey, how is he going to do at his position? You know, how are they going to use him? Is Baker going to move him back into, what is that going to look like? Where is he going to line up? Greg Penn is another one. I think there's an interesting one there. 89 tackles last year. Could be that guy that's alongside Harold Perkins, kind of be that guy. Savion Jones. I know that they are looking for that middle kind of like that. Hey, that lineman, how do they look there? You talked about Jacoby and Gilroy as well. They got to shine. They got to really step up for this defense there. And then Major Burns, I think, is interesting as well. He had 93 tackles at the star position, so that's one of those guys to also watch.
Yeah, like I said, I like Burns and Perkins the most from this list, but it's an interesting state of LSU football because normally when you try to put impact players on the LSU football list, you struggle because there's so many. And this year, I think we're struggling because we were kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for guys that we think can be super impactful for them. So I hope that that's not the case following this year. I do think that this is going to be an iffy year for that defense. I think cleaning house was the right move. I just think it might take a second. Like you said, some growing pains early, but hopefully Perkins back in his natural position and Burns flying all over the field as that star. I think that's a step in the right direction from last year.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and you know what? Even though they have all those changes in the defense, whatever, 9.5 wins was their big game. Like 9.5 is kind of where they're at in the schedule. Big game at USC. That's in Las Vegas, first week of the season, probably one of the biggest games of there. Little SEC Big Ten showdown. We get to say that now with USC going over to the Big Ten. Nichols at South Carolina versus UCLA versus South Alabama versus Ole Miss. The schedule lines up pretty nice for them. At Arkansas, at Texas A&M versus Alabama is a tough little stretch there. Florida, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma. So back into the schedule is a little tougher. They got to do better at the beginning. I think they got to really come out hot, which puts them at some pressure, especially with that defense and all the change and the turnover that we just mentioned there. What stands out with their schedule and where are you at on their over-under in terms of where you're taking?
I think they go 5-0 to start the year.
Yeah.
I think getting Ole Miss at home is critical. I think getting Alabama at home is important. I also think that there's a chance that they lose that Ole Miss game and that Alabama game, if only because I think those are two offenses that should be able to put up points. I think at Texas A&M, I would chalk that up as a loss at this point. I think at Florida is always going to be a tough one, especially with the experience going on over at Florida. But by the end of the season, Florida might be in shambles. For all we know, that's kind of the state of that program. It's very thin level of margin for error over there. But then finishing the season against Oklahoma is one of those where I think we're maybe sitting at 9 wins there and we're going for 10, and that could be the decider. And I'm leaning the under for LSU.
Yeah, I'm going under too. So I'm with you. I think I'm at under right now because I think that there's some uncertainty. That defense, I think their schedule is tough. And the way I look at it, it can come apart quick. They lose a couple games they're not supposed to. I think it can kind of tumble a little bit. And I think we got to start seriously talking about Brian Kelly a little bit. I think that we got to, hey, is he made out for LSU? I mean, they brought him in to go He beat Alabama. So they did beat Alabama, but it's one of those things. They brought him in and they got to go compete for SEC titles. Like that's the biggest thing there. And so from an outlook perspective, when I'm talking about LSU, I do think that they got blue chip guys and they're building there. It's just what is their identity, right? I think the biggest thing is I think it's huge for that new defensive coordinator to come in there. How do they build that identity for LSU? And in Brian Kelly, can you right the ship? And really it comes with that quarterback play. I mean, if Nussmeier's your guy, okay, fine. But you got to really get that defense in tune now because you lost Jaden Daniels, you lost Malik Neighbors, you lost Brian Thomas Jr., you lost guys that offensively was putting up the most points in the NCAA, and you couldn't win with that. I mean, you won, but you couldn't win the games that mattered. And now that you lost that, I think that's an identity. That's a Brian Kelly. He's got to figure this out, and that's on him. And I think that they're in a weird position. I think LSU's at a weird position where they should be doing better. I mean, with DeBoer now at Alabama, Saban's gone, right? And it's like, hey, this could be the setup. You could be the number 2 team in that conference and really go for it. And I think there's too many question marks for a guy going in his 3rd year at LSU.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to I hate saying it this way, but I think they got lucky with Jaden Daniels. I think he developed in a way that some people saw, but not a lot of people saw. Not a lot of people saw a Heisman winning quarterback at least, and so even getting lucky, that wasn't good enough. Now you're hoping that your internal development with Nussmeier is good enough, but then after that, you're still going to need a quarterback to come in and be the guy. I think they recruit well enough where they can hang their hat on that side of it. But going and getting Swan is one of those where it's like, are they confident in this group moving forward? And what is the state of that? Are they trying to maybe hit on a Jaden Daniels-esque type transfer? I'm not sure. I do think it's a weird state where I think you're right. If this is a 9-win team, Brian Kelly will probably get another year or 2, but I wouldn't be shocked if they choose to move on. They've moved on from what I would say are better head coaches, for less than that. So weird state for LSU. I think this is a good football team. I think they're going to score a lot of points. I think they're going to give up a lot of points still. And so I think it's going to be pretty tough to get to the college football playoff this year.
Oh yeah, no, I think so too. But LSU fans, tell us why we're wrong. What do you think here? Drop it in the chat. Do you think your defense can really take over? Do you see that next step from Nussmeier? How are you with Brian Kelly? How do you feel about him moving forward as your head coach? He's recruiting well. He's got the recruits in there, but can he put that product on the field? So let us know. We appreciate you guys watching. We'll catch you on the next one.